Hi, everyone. I am going to share something and then we will get started. All right. So I'm Amy, and we are going to talk about REBT, which stands for, remind me, Art?
Rational emotive behavioral therapy.
And it's cooperation with religiosity and how it can work together or how it cannot work together. And the articles that we read coincide with this. So that will be the topic for today. So we will go ahead and get started. First, we are going to discuss the articles that we read and what they were broadly discussing and the points, the big points that they emphasized. So first, we'll start with Ellis's stance.
Yeah, so I think understanding where Ellis is coming from and why there's this discussion happening between religiosity and REBT is a lot of where he's coming from for rational emotive behavioral therapy is a very logical, rational mindset and kind of more based in what he would consider scientific, fact-based, and it's to deter what he would call irrational beliefs. And,
Right.
And in his words, irrational beliefs that then cause disturbances.
Right.
And so there's this conversation that he's having about, which his initial stance, I think, was very, not pro, but anti-religion.
Right. That's what I took away, that he was very firm in his belief that the two could not work together, that religion was inherently a philosophy that goes against being rational, and that it would, without fail, bring about irrational beliefs. Now, I mean, he was a self-declared atheist, and but he did later in life start to soften that stance and walk it back, talk about how the two could work together. In the article, it discussed how some of the reasons that he just, he decided, let me clarify what I'm saying. He was coming across as, okay, I think you've misunderstood what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Let's clarify exactly what I'm trying to say. He believed that emotional health is affected by religious, non-religious beliefs held by the client. And those who view God as a warm, caring, and lovable friend will have more positive outcomes. So it wasn't complete as in the beginning. It wasn't this very rigid stance of the two cannot work together. If you believe in a God who cares about you and who wants good for you, that's also what we are trying to accomplish. And so the two can then work together.
Which I know when I was reading it, thinking about his lifespan from, I think it was like the
early 1900s.
Yeah, like it was prior to some of the world wars, and to what I was kind of perceiving it as, why you would walk that back necessarily is because society in that time, you're talking about,
right,
the world is probably predominantly religious,
right,
and that provides a lot of meaning to people and a way to kind of navigate life. And so I think that given the time and not just that, but like what religion means.
And probably also at that time, the fact that the world was predominantly religious, but also very strictly religious, especially in this country, certain cultures, religion was very strictly adhered to. There were expectations that morally, there was no wiggle room. And so in that time, his stance
which
can be better understood as, well, if you can't see that, there's room for movement, then how do we go from these beliefs to a belief that is going to help?
And you saying that kind of made me realize that what usually happens when you go from one extreme, right? The other person wants to pull it to the other, like, polar opposite.
Right.
And I think that, I don't know, should we kind of, so I'm debating on which conversation to have right now. Is it like, should we dive in a little bit into more of what REBT is, and like kind of its foundation of what he views, and then like juxtapose it between like some of the views and beliefs that religion has, and how those two kind of align with one another?
Or what was your other thought?
I guess going into more of the conversation of, which is like the musts and the shouldn'ts and masturbation, which is the one.
So if you read the articles, there was an example where a client, or talking about clients and their beliefs around masturbation, and we were having a conversation about, I wonder if that's where the term masturbation came from. Client, about the rigidness. Some people, especially many years ago, felt about masturbation and how it was just a horrible, you were not supposed to do it, and it was wrong, and there was no tolerance for it. So we had a little laugh around that. No, I think, what you said originally, talking about the tenets of what REBT is, and then comparing it to what the expectations of,
which, I mean, you've done a great job, and I'm hoping everyone can see this, like outlining some of the foundational things here, which kind of, we were discussing prior to this, is like, it almost looks like the 10 Commandments.
Yeah,
right?
right. These are the 10 Commandments of REBT. So let's discuss those. So you can see what we have listed there. He felt like the philosophy of REBT was to help with self-control and change, unconditional self-acceptance, high frustration tolerance, and the rest that you can read there. And that there are some religious philosophies that they are in congruence with this, but there are some that go, just like you were saying, polar opposite. That you should feel bad about things. There should be a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, and that those sway the complete opposite direction. And in those cases, could the two work together to bring about healing and change for a person?
Yeah, which I know in the Johnson article, they would argue that REBT, in fact, works way better with those that are religious, because they align so well in some of these things. I mean, you're talking about self-acceptance, acceptance of others, and I mean, this like kindness factor, and this sense of like almost inner peace with oneself, which I think can have a very spiritual kind of outlook toward it. I think that.
Right, I agree. I felt like when I was reading about REBT, that it did have a spiritual essence to it, right? That it was about improving yourself and coming, to peace, or coming to terms with who you are and what you're capable of, and how you view the world. And so I felt like there was a lot that was similar between some aspects of religion, or some religious beliefs, and REBT.
Yeah, and I was thinking, not to put like words in Ellis's mouth or anything, but I was trying to conceptualize why he was kind of, where his stance was at initially. And I mean, eventually he did walk it back, but just the thought of, and I'm not saying you know, believing in a higher being is good or bad. You know, if that's what you need in your life, then that's what you need in life. But I would say that maybe part of his perception of that was going too far one way, where you're giving control so much to this what he would call like a, not irrational, but this thing that can't be measured. Can't, it's just like this ethereal being, higher power thing that,
Right.
in a sense, just like giving over control to the extent at which it causes maladaptive behaviors,
Right.
where you're kind of defining yourself by that, which I can see, you know, if you stray too much one way, and it starts to be a maladaptive thing where now religion is making you feel a sense of shame, a sense of guilt, a sense of just having low self-esteem in yourself because you're not meeting the expectations of this person, this well, not person, but this higher being. And I do remember, which we discussed briefly, one of the quotes that stuck out, I think, was in the Johnson one, about this idea of the reason why some people might have a skewed outlook on religion is because of their view of, well, the preachers, whoever it is that are talking about it, not expressing the idea of what God is. And it's not a magical, we're going to just wave your problems away and they're going to be gone because you have this religion.
Right. Them not expressing their thoughts clearly, and people being left essentially to interpret it on their own, and someone not having either the capacity or not having the experience to say, well, I understand that this is not just a fix all. This is not going to fix all my problems. And so, yeah, there was that.
So I did want to, and then probably you can change slides if that's okay. But I was also wanting to ask you, how do you view the ABC model and kind of the structure of the approach, and how that can be put in that lens of religiousness? Like, what are the components that you feel work really well? And then I can share some of my views on that as well. Well, should we discuss the ABC model?
Yes, let's do that first. So Ellis had a model that he used during therapy. It was called the ABC model. It actually has 5 components: A, B, C, D, and E. And so the A stands for activating events. That is naming the event that causes you to feel whatever feeling it is that you feel, usually a maladaptive feeling. B stands for
the belief system, right?
Read Eric's handwriting. Okay, so their belief system around that. So
I think that's like the main, right?
Right. The belief system, right? Which is true in both REBT and in religion, the belief system that drives how it is you think about things,
perceiving the world, and kind of the consequences that come from that.
And then C is the consequences. What consequences? And so that is the ABC theory and REBT. And so like we just said, I think that belief system is how the two are connected, right? You have a belief system, whether it's based in a deity, a religion, or whether it's based in what am I capable of? What does the world expect from me? What do I expect from myself? That is what drives how we perceive the world, how we perceive what we do, and what the consequences are for our actions.
Yeah, and I think the discrepancy initially arises from the belief system for Ellis is something that, if irrational, leads to disturbances and leads to these feelings of maladaptive behaviors or consequences, which, like we discussed initially, he viewed that as like your belief in God, if too religious or too absolute, could lead into that irrational thinking. But the way in which it kind of gels really well is that the belief system in religion can guide you in ways that provide meaning, provide a way to navigate the world. And I think that we as creatures want to have
Right.
like that reason for doing things, reason for living. And
Right.
I mean, I know this is probably going into what we discussed for existential stuff, but it is a meaning making thing. We want
Right.
to have a reason for doing things, a reason for living. And if that's religion for you and it's providing
Right.
a healthy outlet, I think that
And that's the key. I
yeah.
think if it's providing a healthy outlet, and that's where Ellis decided, you know what, let me walk this back. Let's talk about when can the two work together? When can the two, when do the two align, and when do the two diverge and are not able to work together? So let's talk a little bit about this slide that's up right now, talking about how when is it healthy, and what can the clinician do to ensure that they are providing a place for someone who has these strong religious beliefs, that uses them to guide their life, to make decisions. How do what we as clinicians navigate that, and what is our role to our clients and even to ourselves when it comes to working with clients that hold these strong beliefs? So we have carefully examined their own views about religion. I think that's really important with the many religions, and then with those who don't even necessarily adhere to a religion. I think we as clinicians have to be very careful to not impose, not say, well, you're wrong, I'm right, and make sure that we know firmly where we stand, but also that be accepting of those who don't believe what we believe or don't live the life we necessarily live. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that for me, kind of, I would say don't, just because the religion component is added to it, like don't shy away, don't automatically like get a fear from like approaching that topic, because what our job is to do in general is to provide space to like walk with the client in a way that you're using the same language. You do this with someone that's not religious. You're using the same language. You're trying to see where their worldview is coming from. And yet religion does provide a little bit more of a structure to that in a way of kind of doing that. But I don't think that I don't want to say significant difference from doing that with somebody that isn't as religious, because they still have a way of viewing the world, a structure of viewing the world. Maybe they don't see it as a religious component, but that's all religion does is provide that. And I mean, when we're talking about like choosing your language, working with members of the clergy for clarifying doctrine, I think is very important. But that's also goes into like a support system, right?
Right.
And if you were working with somebody that wasn't as religious, that's just talking about a support system.
Right.
The support system and someone that you can confide in, that has a way of understanding you and understanding your perspective, whether that's a family member, a close friend. In this instance, it'd be someone of the clergy that understands the doctrine.
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of overlap in kind of viewing the similarities instead of trying to like separate the two as like, oh, if you're religious,
right,
this can't align.
we have to work this way, and if you're not, then we have to work in a completely different way. I completely agree. I think that the same approach works kind of across the board. We need to make a connection with them. That will happen often through using language that they find comforting, that is familiar to them. And in this regard, it would be talk about things that they hear probably in church or wherever it is that they practice their faith. And so you know, you mentioned talking to the clergy. It brought that up in that article, and I really appreciated that. I thought so. It brought it up in a couple of different ways. It brought it up in the sense that there could be explanation for you or for us as the therapist to gain clarification around what they believe and how it's implemented and how they use it in their everyday life. But also there is the possibility that clergy could be helpful in clarifying for a client.
Yeah.
A client could have a very strong belief, and clergy could bring some clarity or even shift in the way they see things to help with maladaptive thinking.
Yeah. And I was thinking of, like, you know, when we're talking about the recognizing the clinical significance of tightly held beliefs and like the consequence of that, right? I know religion provides some way of viewing consequences when you're like going against the doctrine or whatever that may be, but there's also consequence to actions even if you're not religious. It's just structuring that that talk, that conversation in that same religiosity component.
Right.
I guess this is kind of answering like the question of, do you necessarily need to be religious in order to work with a client that is religious?
Right.
And I'm of the opinion, which you know, I want to hear yours as well, that no, you don't. I think that as long as you're open to learning, to working with the person, working with the tools, the resources that they have, which I think that's what you should be doing in general, right? That you will be doing yourself and the client a service to provide that other perspective, right? I mean, I'm not saying change their religious point of views, but there are certain things that can be missed, and like I would say, as a non-religious person, that if I spoke with someone that is religious, there's things that I can take away from that.
Right.
There's conversations to be had there that I think can work well with one another.
You know, I think it's goes kind of along what you're saying. It made me think of how we have common factors across therapies. I think we can have different ways of we can call things different names, but it's the same thing. I think that's what we can do as we work with clients who perhaps their belief system is not our belief system, but it's still the same idea.
Yeah.
And so we can definitely work with clients who they may adhere to a belief system that we know we would never be a part of, but they feel, you know, a great strong urge to be faithful in their marriage. Well, so do lots of people outside of that faith. And so there's plenty of commonality that can be found even across those lines. And we can definitely, I agree with you, definitely work with clients and just be mindful. And one thing that was emphasized was to be mindful that how their beliefs, how much they mean to them, and how powerful that can be in therapy. And so using that to help them.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it works well as therapists. All these modalities that we're using are a way to kind of guide where we're taking the conversation, and like religion is providing you kind of that way to guide the conversation and like, hey, you know, and obviously we probably want to work in congruence with their clergy or whatever it may be. I was also thinking, like, don't preemptively shut the door on someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, because I think, I mean, this goes back to the main foundation of Ellis, and I think religion. We're talking about acceptance of people and
acceptance of yourself.
Yeah, and if you shut that door and just say like, no, I don't want to work with you because there's a religious factor there that I'm uncomfortable with, or whatever it may be, that's kind of making you apprehensive about working with a client in that regard. I think it's a little sad, right? Because you're you're closing that opportunity to kind of connect more.
And to do the job that I think we all want to do as therapists, to help someone have a better life.
Yeah.
So I agree.
Which, I don't know, I think we might be at time.
Let's see. All right. Maybe we can answer one question. Let's see. We may have already talked about some of these things.
Yeah, which I don't know, like, how is religiously sensitive therapy distinguished from religiously insensitive therapy? I mean,
I think, right. That seems like it would be pretty obvious.
Yeah.
You don't want to tell somebody you're wrong.
Yeah.
You need to, that's got to go. But
we're not trying to
using-
have a right or wrong conversation here.
right.
Yeah.
How is religious sensitive therapy distinguished from, oh, that's one, how does religiously sensitive therapy contribute to treat good outcomes? We mentioned, talked briefly about that, how it can be advantageous. And there's research that's proven, that those who have that faith to hold on to can often, sometimes more often than those who don't have, that they find that very comforting, and can use that as a catalyst to propel themselves into a better place. Yeah.
Because I think we're, at the end of the day, as therapists, we're trying to like reinforce values and beliefs and ways to cope with life. And I think for religion, they kind of have like that blueprint of, this is how we create meaning in our lives.
Yeah.
This is what provides us with the values and sense of,
Yeah.
belonging. So I think having that religious component can in fact work really well with the therapist and the client that is religious, to be able to
I agree.
create that acceptance talk, that kind of more healthier coping ways of dealing with life.
I agree.
Anyway.
So we're going to stop right there. Thank you for listening. But you really had a choice. And we look forward to seeing everyone else's analyzation. Is that a word?
Yeah, analyzation
of your articles. Bye, everyone.
Later. We did it.